you very much, Ashima. So I hope you're all caffeine loaded. I've had 4 cups of coffee and I have 2 hours of slides to go through in the next 24 minutes and 46 seconds. So I'm going to talk about the convergence of exponential technologies, including machine learning, in what I call the plecosystem economy. Plecosystem is a contraction for multi-platform ecosystem. And the term that Ashima referred to that I invented about 5 years ago at the NIPS conference in Montreal is the diadarity. I'm going to speak to that as well. Fasten your seatbelts. I'm going to try and move very, very quickly. And they will have the slides associated with the video for the things that I won't have time to cover in the 24 minutes and 8 seconds remaining. And if this button worked, I would go to the, oh, sorry, I'm looking at my laptop. So Charles Dickens, in The Tale of Two Cities in 1859 famously wrote, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light, it was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope, it was the winter of despair. And we're seeing a lot of these polarities in a lot of what we're doing, not just politically, but in some of the opportunities for the technology. So there's an impedance mismatch between exponential tech innovation, which is compressed, and I don't know why earlier this there's supposed to be an image of a vice below here, but it's not showing. The exponential tech innovation is happening compressed between the policy paralysis at the national level and the very conservative medical culture. And that is something that it really represents the inflection point we're at today. In the past, we've relied on policy. In the future, we're going to rely much more on tech innovation for advancing medical care. A couple of historically relevant quotes. Baruch Spinoza's, "Nothing in nature is random. A thing appears random only through the incompleteness of our knowledge." William Gibson famously said, as a sci-fi writer, "The future is already here, it's just unevenly distributed." And I add, converged, generalized, operationalized, and scaled. Warner Slack, a professor at Harvard, once said, "Any physician who worries that a computer will replace him should be replaced." Some contemporary quotes. George Box, an eminent British statistician, said, "All models are wrong, some are more useful." This has profound impact on machine learning. How well does your target substrate resemble your training data set? Larry Smarr, amazing innovator. Your immune system and brain are booted up by your microbiome. I'll come back to that. Hod Lipson of Columbia said, machines teaching machines is becoming the fastest exponential technology yet. And then I've been saying for a while, and John Doerr said on Monday in Washington, D.C., the hype of machine learning underestimates its true future impact, and I truly believe that. The Sage of Omaha, Warren Buffett, I was really hoping to get a great quote out of his annual talk this morning, and he was pretty shy on healthcare, despite what he's doing with Amazon and J.P. Morgan. But he's said for quite a while, healthcare is like a tapeworm, just sucking the nutrients out of the system. And then the one quote from this morning that was relevant is, we'll have a CEO in a couple of months. So there's no more clue from his talk this morning. Sorry, I was quite disappointed, but that's all he said. Oh my goodness, we're getting all of our graphics not coming through. And I have to tell you, we did a dry run and they came through fine. Okay, this is a classic exponential curve, imagine. And the impact is on the vertical axis and time is on the horizontal axis. And there's a stick figure looking out at the future inflection point. And as Niels Bohr, the physicist, famously said, predicting is very difficult, especially when it involves the future. And what we're good at is knowing what's going to happen, but it's very difficult to predict when. The naming of this convention, TiE Inflect, is so appropriate because we are absolutely at the inflection point in digital health. And so that inflection point says you are here. That was at the inflection point of the curve that you're imagining. Couple of survey questions. How many people here have read Blue Zones? Just show of hands. Anybody? Couple. How many have read The Seventh Sense by Ramo? No, oh, a couple people, okay. Drive by Daniel Pink, cool, okay. Those are 3 books that really frame a lot of my thinking about where the tech is taking us in the future. Who knows what Niven's laws are? Any sci-fi buffs in the room? Okay, Larry Niven, who wrote Ringworld, one of the preeminent sci-fi writers, and I'll come back to that. How many of you actually use Alexa or Google Home or any one of the chat bots? How many are writing to the open APIs in one of these? Oh, awesome, okay. Those of you who are not, I believe that the next trillion-dollar business, the first trillion-dollar business, is in chatbots. Motivation at scale is emotionally based. The reason that we have all these human emotions and they're universal is because they have evolutionary selective advantage. So when we talk about machines eliminating the emotional axis, that doesn't conform to an evolutionary thesis. Conversational relationships are emotional. The first technology, closing it in the Turing test, is the evolution of chatbots and telepathy, as I'll describe. And I encourage you to all experiment soon. How many of you watched Black Mirror? Oh, wow. Okay, Netflix. It's near-term dystopian futures. There's one called Nosedive that's really worth watching, where everybody rates everybody like you do on Uber and Airbnb, except for everything. Seems kind of creepy in the movie. China's been implementing it for over 2 years. You can download the app from Alipay that does exactly what's in the dystopian Black Mirror. It has major implications for what we do with machine learning. Safety engineering for AI, Elon Musk donated $10 million to MIT for a safety engineering institute. And how many people know how the US healthcare system works? If you do, please explain it to me. I haven't figured it out yet. Blue zones. Dan Buettner decades ago studied communities where there's long health span and lifespan and came up with a couple of conclusions. Diet, fresh and local. Exercise leads to global methylation of your DNA, that we know the mechanism of how exercise helps maintain longevity. Sleep, we clear the beta amyloid out of our brain when we're sleeping. And disruption of our circadian rhythm disrupts melatonin, highly associated with several forms of cancer. And then finally, social health, caring and compassion. Carnegie Mellon has studied this, and it's very clear that the health of your social support system is directly correlated with how well you resist a virus and how sick you are when you get it. This is a famous slide showing that only about 10% of our health outcomes is due to the multi-trillion-dollar healthcare economy. The rest of it is the other things, individual behavior and the choices we make with those last four factors, most importantly. But who knew healthcare was so complicated? This is a map of the current healthcare system. Some of you raised your hands. Could you please stand up and explain this to me? Okay, confusing market segmentation. It's all over the place. Here's another, this is from PwC, and not even listed, because this is 3 months old, is the Amazon, JP Morgan, and Berkshire Hathaway announcement. This is a physician trying to make sense of all this with 10 hands and still not enough, and by the way, not one hand is touching the patient. What's wrong with that picture? Here's the patient who is thoroughly confused by a barrage of conflicting information. Here's a list of some of the exponential technologies that we're all working on and trying to converge. And here's my view of why machine learning is finally coming of age in the third generation of AI. And it has to do with, it's the inverse of the Big Bang. Big Bang was all energy and all matter was concentrated at a single point in space and time, and after the Big Bang, both matter and energy have been expanding in the universe at an accelerating rate. What's happening with data is the exact inverse, that all data and all knowledge is converging in a single point in space and time at an accelerating rate. So that inversion has led to digital exhaust training data sets, which is what makes ML happen. Everybody refers to, we got better processors, we got better neural nets. It's really about having these training data sets that's really driving this evolution of machine learning. Again, I'm a recovering evolutionary biologist, and so I like to think of metaphors. The tropical rainforest is the most efficient ecosystem to convert solar energy into carbon-based life through diversity of genetics. Likewise, those of you who are working on developing new products need to think very carefully about how much diversity you can bring into your environments. Diversity of perspectives, diversity of disciplines, diversity of technologies, because the real solutions of the future are going to involve multiple exponential technologies. And I like to think of a metatopical brain forest as that representation. This is Larry Smarr. He worked in Stephen Hawking's labs in the collision about black holes with his PhD, and then he invented supercomputing, and then he put the team together that did a lot of the original work in virtual reality, and then he applied all of that and really catalyzed the evolution in microbiomics. What you're seeing is 6 different patients and the histograms of all the bacteria that have been sequenced in their gut. And you can look at these, the bacteria in someone's gut, and there are over 100 diseases now where we can actually say, oh, that looks like a Crohn's disease, that looks like a Reiter's disease, based upon the bacteria in the gut. We also know that someone taking a very powerful curative immunomodulatory cancer agent will be cured unless they take an antibiotic 2 weeks before, in which case it's totally worthless, because the bacteria condition up and down regulation of the genome, up and down regulation of the immunome, and the interconnectedness of these biologic phenomenon is profound and not well understood. So in the ecosystem economy, again, a multi-platform ecosystem, there are service platforms, data platforms, API platforms, experience platforms, and so forth. All of these are evolving exponentially, but you need to be mindful in how you develop your products and services across these platforms. There are a couple of principles about the ecosystem: exponential growth, synergy and convergence, data liquidity, person centricity, and open source communities that accelerate innovation. Some convergence hotspots, as I mentioned, chatbots, voice recognition, cloud, machine learning, N of 1 training, meaning that we need to localize these to every single individual, their preferences, their emotional state, their genomics, their biology, their microbiomics, on and on. It captures the native wiring of the human brain. The human brain is heavily dedicated to oral communication. If you look at the wiring of the brain and what lights up when we're in conversation, our brain is wired around conversation. So that's why chatbots are going to totally disrupt everything, and machine learning has a huge input. For real-time decision support, we need to have a conversational intrusional hierarchy. In the meshing of the human and the machine, how does the machine know when to deliver what? How are they assessing your emotional tone, your receptiveness, the context of the conversation, so that it can be smooth and not interrupt a discussion between you and your personal care team or your household or your doctor, but to be very fluid and facile in how it does that. Telepathy plus chatbots equals a diadarity. I'm going to come back to what I mean by telepathy in a bit. Self-service with intelligent routing and escalation and machine learning, so that you can go onto the web and have a dialogue with a chatbot on the web and get an accurate clinical recommendation. In diabetes, we know that if someone gains 2 or 3 pounds or loses 5 pounds or exercises more, all the algorithms that we used yesterday are no longer valid. So how do we have an adaptive learning system based on you using machine learning? Seizure detection, the company Empatica, and the thing I like about what they're doing is their goal is to provide peace of mind to family members who have someone with a seizure disorder, so that they can be alerted in advance, if not at the time of a seizure, so they can actually sleep at night and not be constantly worried about their loved one having a seizure. A key machine learning targets, imaging is by far the easiest. The number of features and feature vectors in imaging is relatively small compared to the totality of human experience. And so that's been the earliest win in healthcare, and it's just massive. It's going to disrupt everything that's image-based. But again, with convergence, doctors don't just look at an image and make a diagnosis. They associate that with a clinical history and the lab tests and other sources of information. So the comprehensiveness of machine learning, not just on images, but on all aspects of health, becomes very important. The socialome and the exposome, the patient safety, personalized diurnal nomograms. So most people don't know this, but there's a huge amount of information that hasn't been fully published yet about how the microbiome and other factors up and down regulate our genomes radically throughout the day. So it turns out the genome is just the substrate, the playground for our interaction with the environment, and it changes constantly depending upon those decisions we make associated with those 4 factors of the blue zones. AR and VR, IoT and edge analytics, these are all important. Meta ML is, I like to make up words, this is my most recent one, but when we have all this machine learning about all this stuff, how do we decide when the machine meshes with the human and has that interaction? So we need machine learning to actually assess the relationship itself to know how and when to insert what. This is my taxonomy of AI concerns: conventional disintermediation of jobs. Second one is autonomy run amok, like autonomous drones that are weaponized. Unintentional bias. There's several books that I'll reference in a second that talk about how amplification of social inequity is a feature of machine learning. And then intentional bias, the Black Mirror example I gave. In China today, you download this app, you rate everything, you get rated on everything, and it determines what events you get to go to, what priority you have for seating, what interest rates you pay on a loan. This is something that now the government and the proprietors of this application get to drive what the human values are that are applied to you based upon how you interact with this machine learning system with all of your data. So everybody worries about, well, what about all this bias in the machine learning? Well, we think in carbon, machines think in silico. This is an alphabetical list, I could only get up to F, of known cognitive biases in carbon. We're learning more and more the in silico biases that are comparable but different. So we need to have a system that allows us to expose transparently what the in silico biases are as well as what the in carbon biases are, so that we can actually be aware of what risks we have in making any particular decision. So I mentioned the unintentional bias of machine learning. The first book to come out by Cathy O'Neill's Weapons of Math Destruction. Second one was Automating Inequality, How High-Tech Tools Profile, Police, and Punish the Poor. These are systematic biases that we need to protect against very consciously and deliberately. This is a picture from Black Mirror about social credit, and this is a representation of how we get a credit score based upon that if we download the app. And you can do it right now from Alipay to engage in this somewhat perverse sociologic experiment. Larry Niven, one of the pioneers in sci-fi, has created 5 laws. He had a sense of humor. So the first one is never fire a laser at a mirror. Remember that. Second one, and you can't read any of his books again if you do that. It's easier to destroy than to create. Ethics change with technology. The only universal message in science fiction: there exist minds that think as well as you do, but differently. That's, again, back to this ecosystem of minds and a metatopical brain forest. And then giving up freedom for security is sometimes naive, and how relevant is that today to our political context? So telepathic chatbots, the dietary is here soon. There are 3 groups that I know of, there are probably others, who have developed mental telepathy, reading your mind. Mary Lou Jepsen with optoelectronics has read-write with thoughts to the brain. Arnav Kapoor's alter ego project at MIT does neuromuscular inferencing. And as a result of, and then Japan has a demonstration of image telepathy. They can have anyone look at hundreds of images of a cat, hundreds of images of a dog, hundreds of images of a chair, a refrigerator, you name it, and record the electrical activity in the back of the brain, and then tell the person a year later, think of a dog, or think of an object, and the person can randomly pick one of those, and they can tell them exactly what you're seeing with your imagination in your mind. So there's 4 new human rights in this age of mind reading. First one, the right to cognitive liberty. Second, right to mental privacy. Third is the right to mental integrity. Fourth is the right to psychological continuity. And as I mentioned, I'll make these slides available so that you can have access to these later. There's a 7-dimensional design matrix that I like to think of, and I'm not going to cover this because I got 6 minutes and 16 seconds left. Key issues and opportunities. We get what we incentivize. So how do we use these tools to inform and adjudicate across a value base using perhaps blockchain-based microcredit accounting? There's lots of different opportunities. We need, in healthcare, we need evolution of sensitivity and specificity. So we know that if you take 100 people off the street of New York right now and do a blood test, you can find 7 of them with circulating cancer cells. They're not going to get cancer. Their immune system knocks them out. We're constantly generating cancer cells and then curing them with our immune system. So how do we manage to optimize our immune system against the risk of cancer? Key biomarkers. So do we need to have machine learning operating on our 3.2 billion base pairs every second of every day to know what's going on and our 2,000 plus bacteria in our gut? No. We are finding key biomarkers. And Johns Hopkins recently announced something called CancerSeq, where they have 8 biomarkers for 8 different cancers. So the game in healthcare for early detection and intervention and management of health is what are the key biomarkers, and almost none of them will be genetic. There'll be relatively small number will be genetic. There'll be much more endpoint because the genes are up and down regulated so frequently throughout the day. And Lee Hood has famously referred to systems biology as the way we need to think about these so that we can reduce down to what's relevant. Diseases of disorders and lifestyle, motivational support. How do we use machine learning to understand how you as an individual are motivated? We're all different. Some people are really motivated by humor. Some people want, just tell me what to do, doc. Other people are saying, give me the 4 options and let's talk about it. And other people say, give me the 4 options, give me a week to think about it with my household, and then we can decide. So we need to be able to accommodate individual variation, not only in the genome and the microbiome and the clinical history, but of the motivational complexion of every individual. Mention that with pervasive sensing, there's at least 4 tiers that we need to be mindful of. In IoT, we need to do a lot of things, but most importantly, security, security, and security. The risks of nation-state sabotage of healthcare is significant, and our IoT is our weakest link today. Virtual care. So how do we support people when they're not in the office with us at that moment? And we have a whole hierarchy, and what we're developing is an evidence-based practice for how we match which person with which underlying health problems and which current health problem with, can we solve this with a telephone call? Can we solve this with a text message? Can we solve this with a video visit? Or do they need to go to the emergency room immediately? We want to satisfy their own preferences, but we also want to make sure that we use an evidence basis for what works best for that individual. So this is the architecture I've been working on for telehealth and virtual care. And then when will blockchain be real? Now this video you're about to see, 1 minute, is from a Nobel laureate in 1999.
So that I think that
Volume up, please.
Is going to be one of the major forces for reducing the role of government. The one thing that's missing, but that will soon be developed, is a reliable e-cash, a method whereby on the internet you can transfer funds from A to B without A knowing B or B knowing A. The way in which I can take a $20 bill and hand it over to you, and there's no record of where it came from. And you may get that without knowing who I am. That kind of thing will develop on the internet, and that will make it.
So that was 1999. He was giving the use case and requirements for cryptocurrencies. It's, as Joyce Searles has said, the opposing thumb to the hand of the internet. I'm not going to belabor this. Hopefully most of you understand how blockchain works, but it's a immutable sequence of transactions in a secure distributed ledger. Outstanding challenges, there's intrinsic overhead, there's energy consumption, there's latency, but all of these problems are soluble and the evolution is rapid in the blockchain. Examples, use cases in healthcare for blockchain, supply chain management is huge, personal health record management is huge. There are scores of places where blockchain will play a role. It won't be the sole technology, but it will be the convergence, one of the convergent technologies. So I'm going to talk about, in my minute, 30 seconds remaining, Lucy is a 2-year-old who lives across the street. She calls herself Daniel Dragon now after the popular TV show. But she was sick 2 years ago and had a fever of 104 and a rash, and her parents took her to the emergency room and they waited for 2 hours and they gave up because of all the other kids coughing on her, and took her home without being seen. She was worse the next day. They took her back, exact same experience. This was not one of our hospitals at Kaiser Permanente. But after going to the emergency room twice, they were frustrated because they were afraid of all the people coughing on her and getting nothing done. So what's going to happen in the future is that there will be an oral swab and a polymerase chain reaction home device where they can determine what virus or bacteria is causing that rash and fever and relay that information to their physician, who will have also their pharmacogenomics, who can then agree with the recommended antibiotic if one is relevant, send it at the pharmacy and have it delivered to her doorstep in 5 minutes via drone. And this is what Lucy looks like in 2020. after all of that, convergence of these technologies. And it is the aggregation of all the information about Lucy with the machine learning about how to do the match between the universe of knowledge and everything we know about her that'll make that happen. So one of my big goals is restoring empathy in the digital world. And there's a whole series of things that I'm out of time to talk about, but be happy to talk to afterwards. And I'm going to skip that one and just mention that in all this work we're doing, the biggest opportunity is to create children who are more emotionally resilient early in life so that they don't need disease care. So when we apply machine learning to how to create resilience in children, there's a huge literature on how to do this. I'm on the board of a foundation that is totally focused on bringing modern science to early childhood experience to avoid adverse childhood experiences and raise the health and resilience of people from a very young age rather than trying to rescue them from their bad habits when they're smoking and overweight and diabetic 30 years later. So I like to think of a sage on the shoulder, which is a combination of neurolinguistic programming, natural language processing, cognitive behavioral therapy, and telepathy, and the meshing of the machine and the human in a way that we can begin to mentor our children, whether we're there with them or not, in ways to live and make healthy decisions and have a very resilient lifestyle. And the last slide is a quote that's hanging in the halls of Health and Human Services in Washington, D.C. by Hubert Humphrey. It has been said that the moral test of government is how that government treats those who are in the dawn of life, the children, those who are in the twilight of life, the elderly, and those who are in the shadows of life, the sick, the needy, and the handicapped. And as all of us move forward with machine learning in everything we do, because it will be pervasive in everything, we need to be very mindful of the biases in silico as well as the biases in carbon and manage to the health of our entire communities, because we do know from those two books I showed that there are systematic inherent biases towards inequality, and it's our job, those of us here today, to ensure that we don't allow that to happen. Thank you all very much. Time for one question or no? Yeah, please. Okay, the evidence-based architecture that I was talking about for virtual care is there's two parallel, if you will, orthogonal sources of information. One is if you know everything about the past history of the individual, what medications they're on, what allergies, what diseases they have, and you know what their current complaint is, you can construct from, and we are instrumenting all of our virtual care systems, figure out which of these current complaints, knowing this background about the individual, is most relevant, most appropriate. So could it be a chat session, or is that not good enough? Or could it, if it's so simple, can we do it just with a simple response with a text? Or do they need to have a full video visit where we can actually see what's they're complaining of some motion disorder, which also brings some emotional connection into the dialogue? Or do we need to send them an Uber to take them to or Lyft to take them to the nearest emergency room because they're 63 and they're a smoker with diabetes and they're having crushing chest pain? The second orthogonal practice-based evidence is, what is their preference? If they prefer chat over a video visit or a video visit over an in-person visit because getting to and from the office is a problem, we want to satisfy them according to their preferences, but within the constraints of that evidence-based approach. So it's those two sources of information, preferences and then the full N of one and intersection of decision support, that need to be merged together. Thank you all very much.